Fuzzy Mud, Chapter 16. Wednesday, November 3, 10:15 a.m. Using cotton balls and hydrogen peroxide, Mrs. Latherley cleaned the blood off Tamaya's hand. "You mustn't scratch it," she admonished. "I didn't," said Tamaya. "The more you scratch, the worse it will get," said Mrs. Latherley. "It will just cause the rash to spread. Plus, anytime you break the skin, there's the possibility of infection." "I didn't scratch it," Tamaya repeated. She was seated in a plastic chair in an alcove inside the office. The alcove contained the office printer and the coffee maker. The medical supplies were on a shelf next to the printer. Mrs. Latherley spent most days answering phones or working on a computer, but whenever anyone got sick or needed first aid, she was the person to see. "Maybe I rubbed it a little," Tamaya admitted, "but it doesn't itch. It feels tingly. You know how when your hands are really cold and then you stick them under warm water, the way they get all prickly? That's how it feels." "Uh-huh," Mrs. Latherley said as she took a first aid box off the shelf, but Tamaya didn't think she was really listening. She watched Mrs. Latherley unlatch the lid, then take out various tubes, read the labels, and put them back. Tamaya really wished Mrs. Latherley would hurry. She still hoped she could get back to class in time to finish her journal entry. In her mind, she imagined Hope and Jason and Monica taking turns reading their "How to Blow Up a Balloon" instructions to Mrs. Filbert. She could see the balloons flying out of her teacher's mouth and jetting in circles around the room while everyone laughed. "It isn't fair," she thought. "Why do I always have to miss out on all the fun stuff?" It seemed to be that way all the time. She had missed Hope's limousine birthday party because it had been her weekend to be in Philadelphia. And then Katie, her only sort of friend in Philadelphia, had invited her to go horseback riding in the country with her and her family, but that had been for the wrong weekend. Mr. Franks, the assistant headmaster, stepped into the alcove. "Hi, Tamaya," he greeted her. "You're not sick, are you?" "No, just a rash." "Good. We don't want to ruin your perfect record," he winked at her. Tamaya could feel her face get warm, and she tried very hard not to blush. All her friends agreed that Mr. Franks was movie star handsome. Summer swore he had a tattoo on the back of his neck, which is why he always wore a jacket and tie. Summer didn't know what the tattoo was, but it was definitely something inappropriate. If Mrs. Thaxton found out about it, he would be fired. Mr. Franks bent down to pour himself a cup of coffee, and Tamaya tried to get a peek at his neck. She couldn't see anything. She doubted he really had a tattoo. After all, how could Summer know about it and not Mrs. Thaxton? "Hold out your hand," said Mrs. Latherley. Tamaya waited for Mr. Franks to leave the alcove. She didn't want him to see her ugly rash. "I tried some of my mother's hand cream," she told Mrs. Latherley. "It didn't work." "This will," Mrs. Latherley assured her. As Mrs. Latherley applied the ointment, Tamaya read the label on the upside-down tube. Hydrocortisone 1%. She took heart in the words, "maximum strength." "Do you have any pets?" Mrs. Latherley asked. "Cooper, my dog." "Do you think you might be allergic to Cooper?" "No!" she exclaimed. "That would be horrible. Cooper was the best part of going to her dad's. He slept on the same bed with her, and she often woke up with the dog licking her face." "Has Cooper had any kind of problems lately with fleas or ticks or mange?" "I hope not," said Tamaya. Mrs. Latherley looked confused. "Has he or hasn't he?" Tamaya explained that she saw Cooper only one weekend a month. Mrs. Latherley seemed exasperated. "Tamaya, I'm trying to determine what might have caused your rash. If you haven't been near Cooper, then it obviously didn't come from him." "Sorry," Tamaya said. She felt stupid. It felt confusing sometimes having two different homes. It was like she had two different lives, two half lives, and the two added together didn't quite equal a whole life. She felt like she was missing something. Mrs. Latherley wrapped Tamaya's hand with gauze. "Is there anything else you might have touched recently that you can think of?" she asked. "Maybe some kind of cleaning product?" Tamaya wondered if she should tell Mrs. Latherley about the strange mud. She didn't want to get Marshall in trouble. Still, she knew it was important to tell the truth to a doctor or nurse, even if Mrs. Latherley was just a part-time school nurse. "Well, there was this fuzzy mud," she admitted. "Have you eaten peanuts or peanut butter?" said Mrs. Latherley, showing no interest in the mud. Tamaya's mind remained fixed on the fuzzy mud. It had all happened so quickly, but replaying it in her head in slow motion, she could see herself picking up a handful of the tar-like muck. She vaguely recalled that it had felt warm, although she couldn't be certain that she wasn't just embellishing her memory. "Have you recently eaten any peanuts or peanut butter?" Mrs. Latherley asked again. Tamaya forced herself to focus on the question. "I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich yesterday," she said. "It might have been the day before." "You may be allergic," said Mrs. Latherley. "Next time you see your doctor, have your mother ask for an allergy test. In the meantime, I wouldn't eat any more peanut butter sandwiches." "My mom makes her own strawberry jam," Tamaya offered up, "out of real strawberries. Maybe I'm allergic to that." "Maybe," said Mrs. Latherley. "She's taking me to the doctor after school." "Good." Mrs. Latherley wrapped each of Tamaya's fingers separately, then her palm and wrist. "How does that feel?" Tamaya tried to wiggle her fingers. "Like I'm a mummy," she joked. Mrs. Latherley smiled. "I'd like to give you an allergy pill too, but I need your mother's permission. I'll call her at work. Check back with me after lunch." Tamaya said she would. "And remember, no more scratching." 2 times 1024 is 2048. 2 times 2048, 4096.